Gators.
Welcome from the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter. This is the study group for August 2022. This is our 47th consecutive study group. Our mission here is to bridge the gap between industry leaders and business analysts by building partnerships with professionals, educators, and employers so that we may empower and instruct and engage the BA community. We have a community that spans the globe now. We originally were just located in Tampa Bay, then we took over the northern half of Florida. Now we have people that attend this study group and are members of our chapter from all over the world. So if you're interested in joining us, let us know and we'll do whatever we can to help you. It is our job to mentor, support, network, help you with applying for the test, help you with situations at work, quite a number of things. So we do our best to be assisting. You can reach us in a variety of ways. This is, of course, our Tuesday night study group from 7 to 8 o'clock Eastern. We also have Meetup and Zoom. You have your past meeting recordings that you can see. As I said, this is our 47th consecutive. We have a majority of those recorded. The IIBA website is here, Meetup, Facebook, and we have 2 different LinkedIn groups. So you can access us a variety of ways. Originally, we worked on the sample test questions to prepare for the BABOK. Then we went on to now, and after we finished all the techniques, we are now in our professional series. Last 2 weeks, we had a developer and simulator come in to talk to us. This week, we have Keith Nolen with going to talk about business architecture. Let me tell you a little bit about the chapter and I'll turn it over to Keith. We are a volunteer run chapter. Cliff is our president. Lori's our vice president of finance. Caitlin and Priscilla are board members at large, which basically means they don't have set responsibilities. They just lean in whenever they have bandwidth. My name is Thea Raisins. I am the vice president of career and professional development for the chapter. I actually don't live in the Tampa Bay area any longer, but this is a thing that's close to my heart, so I continue to do it. And we continue to meet virtually this way. If you'd like to reach me, you can reach me through LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn address, and I'm happy to be of assistance. We do need some new board members. We've had board members that have been the same members for about, well, since COVID. And because of that, we haven't had a lot of meetings in person or changes in the board. But we do need some fresh blood. We've had a few people volunteer to lean in to be board members at large. We would like for you to be a board member. If you're interested, contact me through LinkedIn and we will just see what your skill set is, what your availability is, and see what we can do to work with your schedule and see if your interests meet our needs. Bob Churchill is normally here with us. I don't see him online with us at this time. He is our CBAP that's normally in residence. He has a website, rpchurchill.com. It has a wide variety of really interesting things in it that's not only BA related, but he has mechanical engineering, Lean, Six Sigma, project management, and a wide variety of other things that are beneficial to the BA just to have as a resource. Now I'm going to turn this meeting over to Keith Nolen and let him introduce you himself. Keith, I'm going to give you the screen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Thea.
My pleasure.
And share my screen. Well, first I'll do a brief introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Nolen. I work for a large and well-known theme park operator and entertainment company. And I have spent my entire career in IT. I like to tell people that I have had every role in IT except for running cable. I've been a database administrator, a developer. I started my career as a technical communicator, and I am currently employed as a lead business and process architect after spending about 10 years as a dedicated business analyst and earning my CBAP. So today I want to talk about the discipline of business architecture, tell a little bit about my story, about how I got started in it, how I entered it kind of through the realm of process, and give some examples about how I feel that a process lens for moving into business architecture is a really good and fundamental and productive way to do that. So quick agenda for today. We'll talk about session goals. I've already introduced myself. We'll talk about the progression of skills in moving from being a business analyst to being more of a business architect. We'll talk some about the discipline of business architecture. And we'll look at the role of a business architect and kind of compare and contrast it to a BA and a project manager. We'll talk about a fundamental concept, which is architectural perspectives or lenses or viewpoints. We'll get into some of the models of architecture, and we'll talk about starting with the process lens, and I'll run through an exercise of how going through process analysis can actually help build out your business architecture, and we'll leave some time for a Q&A. Okay, let's get started. So today, session goals, we'll learn what business architecture is, the kind of problems it's intended to solve, how business architecture relates to the BA and the PM roles, and like I said, we'll learn about how process can serve as a key source and gateway to business architecture practice. About me, like I said, I've been doing this a long time. I know where all the electrons are buried. Got my CBAP in 2016, and I've had a varied career both as a consultant and employee working for restaurant, commercial real estate, timeshare, entertainment, all sorts of industries. And there's my LinkedIn profile. If you just do a search on LinkedIn for me, my last name is spelled Nolen. I'm normally the first one who comes up. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about a skills progression. And I realize that I'm talking to a group of business analysts. I also realize that there may be people in the group who are perfectly happy with the profession, but sometimes people either have the opportunity or have an interest in doing more than they might do on a day-to-day, or doing different things or working in a different scope than they would as a business analyst. Business architecture is one career path where the skills to be a good business analyst really provide a good and actually a critical foundation. In fact, about 60% of today's architects were once analysts. And of course, your skills, wherever you're going to go, whatever you're going to do, have to progress throughout your career. When you're a junior analyst, you're learning how to break down a problem and describe a solution, and you're also learning about your technology and business domain. A mid-level analyst, which is typically called a senior, you can anticipate issues with a solution and ask the questions that will reveal those issues, which is really a key part of the value proposition of any business analyst long-term. But a lead analyst has the ability to identify and anticipate business needs. They have stewardship and advocacy for the business solution, not just the technical changes. You're thinking about, is this actually going to solve the problem that the business has, but provide the capability that we want, as opposed to does just meet the requirements. So the scope of your vision will grow along with your skills and your responsibilities. And being a strong BA is a good foundation, but that alone is not enough to make the leap to an architectural role. So I've talked about business architecture. What is it? Well, it's concerned with the conceptual, tactical, and strategic structures of the business and enabling to change those structures. It's not the same as enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is much more focused on physical, such as where are my servers, where are my buildings. Those things are part of business architecture, but not nearly as important. So the professions overlap. Some people might even say that business architecture is a subset or a specialization of enterprise architecture, and I won't disagree with that. But I will say that a lot of enterprise architects don't understand what business architecture is. In comparison to being a business analyst, business architecture has moved from how to what and why. It's a strategically proactive role and assists in planning and understanding proposed change at the senior leader, C-level, strategic level. Whereas business analysis is strategically reactive. In other words, there's already a vision of the change we want to make, and business analysis helps assure that the change is made. Business architecture is about making sure that the business makes the right change to enable its strategy. So when it comes to decision making, it's both higher in the organization and earlier in the decision-making process. So let's talk about the problems that business architecture is designed to solve. Many organizations have, especially as they get larger, up to the very largest companies, they lack visibility into the various components of the environment and how those components relate to each other. People, processes, teams, applications, infrastructure. As an example, if you have a business problem that says, we need to change the way we manage our vendors. A lot of organizations, especially very large ones, will not inherently know on a factual basis what systems, what databases, what roles, what teams are going to be affected. Business architecture is designed to answer that and to capture that information and model it out so that you're not relying on tribal knowledge, but that you actually know what's going to be affected and you can design a future state and make the right decisions based on your business architecture. So a lot of times you'll have projects that miss teams, they miss processes, they have unintended consequences. You don't realize until the very end that a certain application needed to change. You'll have a lack of visibility and insight into the impacts of a proposed change. And you won't have an ability, excuse me, to synthesize information from multiple sources in a coherent way, multiple teams, multiple stakeholders. If you can't make coherent change due to your complexity, you need business architecture. Okay, before I move on to my next slide, I will go ahead and take a breath and ask, does anybody have any questions so far?
I don't have questions, but I'm awfully excited about what you're presenting.
Oh, thank you. So Thea, how much time do I have? Normally wrap up at 8, right?
We do normally wrap up at 8 on the dot.
Okay, I will keep that in mind. Okay, let's do a bit of compare and contrast. This is the business analyst to the business architect. Business analysts typically work at the project level. They may work at the program level, which is a collection of progress of projects, but a business architect is really looking at strategic change at the business unit level and up. Time frame is project lifespan versus a business transformation initiative lifespan. Your typical partners as a BA are people who are making the change on the ground, technical SMEs, UX designers, project managers, developers, and the managers who manage those. Whereas a business architect, while they need to have good relationships with those people, are often working with people who are working at an enterprise level, enterprise architects, process owners, product owners, senior managers. The focus is strategic, and the placement for the team ideally is in senior management or reporting into the C-suite, sometimes in process improvement teams, and sometimes on org spanning or horizontal cross-cutting teams. So big differences in the focus and the placement and really the everyday activities of who you're working with. Again, responsibilities. Business analysts are responsible for requirements and the whole requirements lifecycle, from making sure that they're well done to making sure that they are met by the solution and validating that the solution meets them. Whereas the business architect can be about the requirements for a particular enterprise, but those requirements are going to be much less technical, much more transformative. They're going to provide insight into the current state of the business and into the impacts of proposed changes. And when the business comes to them with a goal, they should have the capability to propose changes that will meet that goal. Key skills, these cross over a lot. Analytical, technical, communications, collaboration. You'll see a lot of those on the business architect side. Communications, analytical, collaborative leadership, and conceptual. Very often your business architects wind up leading from the middle. It's not often that you have hard authority as a business architect, but that's not that having to use soft power or in-team influence is very common for a business analyst as well. So let's talk about the architect and the project manager a little bit. Project manager is, again, project level, project lifespan. They're working with project sponsors, managers, technical SMEs, product owners, and they are very focused on the execution and delivery for that particular solution. Whereas the business architect, as we've already pointed out, is more responsible for making sure that the proposed solutions, knowing what those proposed solutions will affect, and that they meet the strategic needs of the business. The project manager is all about that iron triangle: money, time, schedule, resources. The business architect is less concerned without those, but They also have a role in making sure that the project manager or program manager is set up for success. The key skills, again, a lot of crossover. Where the project manager is going to be different is they've got to have those financial management and tactical management skills. Those are less of a need for a business architect. Okay, let's talk about lenses or perspectives. Your business is three-dimensional. All businesses are three-dimensional, but all of the media we work in are fundamentally two-dimensional. So one view is not sufficient to answer every question or examine every aspect of an architecture. You're going to have a lot of different people who want a lot of different answers from you. So your perspective drives your understanding of an architecture and what you need for it. And I'm going to demonstrate this. So let's say we are looking at a nationwide business hosted in the US, and we have a couple of different perspectives we need to look at. We're really concerned with kind of the financial and project management aspects of that business. This is one perspective of that. This is an infrastructure perspective. You've got a shared database. You have 3 project and portfolio management servers. They run your PPM tool, whatever it is, Clarity, something homegrown, whatever the case may be. And then you have some infrastructure that allows it to be accessed from various locations, Seattle, Houston, Denver, and then you've got some remote users going through a VPN. So this is all valid and all true, but it is certainly not the entire picture. Let's say you need to look at the business process. Now, this is literally the same business unit. This is the same function. That, this is project budgeting. But you'll see here, you've got 3 different roles on the side. You've got the budget committee, a project sponsor, and a project manager. If you go back to your previous viewpoint, those concepts are not visible on this viewpoint at all. So I think this helps make the point that different viewpoints of your business are actually very valuable. This also has a sequence of events and phases. So you've got project planning, project launch, and execution. What you don't have here is you don't know what's happening in what system, and you know who's doing what, but you don't know what's happening in what system. So you don't have that perspective in here. Whereas if you look at an application perspective, this is similar to the first perspective we looked at, which was an infrastructure perspective, but it doesn't tell you who does what when, or who's using what. These are all valid models of your enterprise, but none of them give you a complete picture. And that's the thing with perspectives. None of them will give you a complete picture. There's a saying that goes around in the architecture world: all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And it's just true. Because if you look to this model and you say, okay, I have to bring down the PPM system, who's going to be affected? This will not tell you.
No.
So let's talk about some of the different models of architecture out there. There are a lot of ways to model your architecture. This is probably the oldest one. It's called the Zachman framework. It was invented by a guy named John Zachman. On the surface, it looks pretty simple, and conceptually it is pretty simple. It's also the first architectural framework that I actually ever encountered. But if you look across the top, you have 6 questions: why, how, what, who, where, and when. And then you have 6 levels of concept or depth: contextual, conceptual, logical, physical, and detailed. So you can see then that every square has a slightly different item in it that you would, or a deliverable in it. So if we go down, for example, how, at the contextual, you have a process list. We're just setting the context. This is a list of processes that we think we do. Conceptually, you'll have a process model, which is how your processes fit together. Logical, you'll have a process diagram, which is more of a BPMN or swim lane model, an example of which we saw earlier. Physical, you're like, okay, here's the systems that are going to do it. Here's who does what. And then at a detailed level, you'll have the process detailed. If you have this entire stack for your entire enterprise, you know everything there is to know about processes in your enterprise. Now, each of these cells will have detail underneath it. I'll also let you know that almost no organization fills this out completely. You fill it out for as much as you need it. But as I said here, if you can complete most of the cells in a Zachman model, you have a good understanding of your enterprise. So here's another framework. This is on the other end of complexity from the Zachman model. This is called DODAF, the Department of Defense Architectural Framework. It was developed by the Department of Defense starting in the mid-90s. It's focused on the delivery of capabilities. A capability in architectural terms is the ability to provide something of value, whether that is sell a t-shirt or move a tank across the ocean to a new military base. Those are all capabilities. It uses predefined viewpoints for visualizing the broad scope and complexities of an architecture, and it's really designed to handle the kind of complexity you get in the Department of Defense. It's designed for large systems with complex integration and interoperability challenges. It's a very commonly used framework, mostly in the government and defense worlds, as you can imagine. And there's TOGAF, the Open Group Architectural Framework. Have you guys heard of the Open Group before? Are you familiar with them?
Most of us haven't. Go ahead and explain it, please.
So the Open Group is the group behind UML. They are really in the business of creating different modeling standards and frameworks. TOGAF was developed by the Open Group starting in '95, which when it comes to architectural frameworks, doesn't make them the great granddaddy, but that puts them up there. Some key concepts here are architectural domains and their architecture development method, or ADM. And this is the ADM that you see here. You have preliminary work, and then it starts with architectural vision and goes all the way around it. Now, as a business analyst, as a CBAP, the fact that requirements management is right in the middle makes this near and dear to my heart. I will also say that in the marketplace, TOGAF is one of the top 2 or 3 frameworks you will run into. Because it scales well and because you can pick and choose what you do. You can, if you only need to do information systems architecture, technology architecture, and implementation governance, you can do that. A key concept here is kind of the idea of central requirements management. So this is a really good place and a good fit for a business analyst to move into because they understand requirements management. The definition of requirements will change if you're doing this kind of work because you'll not only have solution requirements as in the scope of a particular solution, but you'll have requirements for the way your infrastructure needs to grow, requirements for meeting your strategic goals and so forth. But this is a very common framework, and it's one that I've used in the past. So let's talk about Archimate. Archimate is a little bit different. Everything we've looked at before is a framework. Archimate is really a modeling language. If you've used UML, if you've used BPMN, meaning a standard set of symbols for modeling a particular kind of work, you've used a modeling language. Archimate is a pretty powerful one because it doesn't try and be everything to everybody. It has these 3 core layers, the business layer, the application layer, and the technology layer. And those are color-coded this way for a reason, because that's kind of the standard with Archimate. They actually included the color coding in their standard, which makes it very easy to move from environment to environment and understand which layers you're looking at. It's a discrete collection of objects and relationships, and those are specifically defined so that you can't model nonsense. One of the things that I've seen with different kinds of modeling over the years is that if there isn't some kind of modeling framework, if you just take a bunch of symbols and let anybody throw them on a page, you can wind up modeling things that literally don't make sense. But a properly designed Archimate modeling tool will not let you do that. For example, there's a relationship within Archimate which is called accesses. It's designed for use between an application and a data store. Application X accesses data store Y. There is also a concept of what's called a business user or a role. You cannot have a relationship where an application accesses a role, because that's nonsense. That's not how the real world works. So any Archimate modeling tool will enforce that rule and not let you do that, which increases the value of your models. Because if you try and model something that the framework won't let you do, you need to rethink about your understanding of your objects. Okay, so there's a lot of architectural models, frameworks, deliverables, approaches, all that kind of stuff. And there's dozens and dozens of tools that provide some level of support for this kind of architecture. I mean, if you crack open Visio, you'll see that they have support for Archimate. They've recently added that. And there's probably as many ways to get started in business architecture as there are business architects. But I did a great deal of process work in my career at several different levels, and it made sense for me to start with business process kind of as a natural fit. Okay, this is an example of an Archimate model. This shows an architecture to process insurance claims. So I'm going to start from the bottom and go on up. If you look on the bottom, you've got a mainframe with some data stores, and then it has some services. You've got a customer file service, a claims file service, and a messaging service. Then if you go up to the next level, you've got your applications. You've got a customer administration system, an assessment system, an acceptance system, and a payment system. And these various symbols, they mean different things, but we're not going to go into there now. And some services above those. And then you have your business level, which is really where your concepts and your groups come into play, and your processes. So you have a damage notification, which is a signal or an event to start doing something. And then you have 3 processes here. The processes have the arrows. If you'll notice at the business layer, the processes are in the middle of everything because they have to be. All businesses have processes. Even, a mom and pop convenience store or something like that, even if it's a simple business, they have processes. They may not have any need to write them down or think about them if they're simple and if they're working, but all businesses have processes. They're really core to how every business does work. Okay, and that's what I'm highlighting here. Okay, so why start with a process lens? Why is that a good entry point? Well, 1, they're business critical, as I've said. 2, they're easily understood. Most people can look at a swim lane diagram and get a 5-minute introduction to it and understand the basic symbology, and off they go. It's not very hard to consume. There are well-defined standards. If you're following BPMN or UML, your models are going to be pretty straightforward and easy to read, unless you're getting really, really detailed and complicated about the symbology you're using. I have pretty much never found that to need to be the case. They're central to architecture, and a good process model reveals a lot about your architecture, and strong process skills are foundational for architectural work. If you don't have a grasp of process, if you're not used to thinking that way, any kind of architectural work that you do is really not going to be very successful, simply because whether you're talking about technical architecture, financial architecture, business architecture, the point of it is to facilitate a process, to make things move from one state to another to achieve a business goal. So you've got to have that standard. You've got to have that capability, that viewpoint. Okay, we're going to go into a little demo and exercise of deriving architecture from process. But before I do that, I'm going to take a break and ask if anybody has any questions so far.
I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I'm really enjoying the way you break things down. It's kind of maybe slow to advance for me, understanding and comprehending it, because I'm a newbie in BA, but I'm learning a lot. Especially the diagrams are really really explaining the architecture process, which is a different, it's a different focus in business analysis. It's a completely different field. So it's a good thing the way you're breaking it down. I'm having a better understanding now.
Oh, good. I'm really glad.
I appreciate that. I mean, you're really breaking things down, and then the flow chart. It's like it's like when you learn programming. You have to break it down in pieces. You start with the the input, the output, the flow chart, the coding, the pseudocode. So same thing. This is like the same steps you're taking, and I appreciate that. It's how you learn better like that.
Yeah. Thank you for telling me that, Ben. Yeah, since I started as a developer, developers may not realize it, but they have to be very process oriented because development is computers think in a linear manner. Now we've developed some programming standards that kind of say, no, you've also got some state with collections of objects and stuff like that. But the truth is things happen in a linear process oriented manner. So it is a, having been a developer is a good foundation for this as well. Okay, any other questions, comments? All right, I'll take that as a no. So let's talk about deriving architecture from process. As I said before, this is a swim lane diagram. Most people, if they haven't seen these before, can learn to read these pretty quickly. I've done a couple of things different on this model, just to explain it. Normally, the swim lanes are your user groups. So here we have a resource manager, a project manager, or business groups, or roles as we call them. But I've also added a system as a lane. One of the reasons I've done this is that I found in some process work, I usually don't do this anymore, but sometimes it can be very useful to help people understand and collaborate and decide about what's going on, to add a system as an actor. The other thing I wanted to point out here are a couple of things. We've got this column or this phase of predecessors. These are actually things that have to be done before we get into our main process, which is resource management and allocation adjustment. So this is something that you'll do in a business that your resource managers will do when they've got ongoing people. First thing you have to do is initiate their assignment. So that's this phase here. But you'll see as we go into it, in these predecessors, the employee has been onboarded already. So that's a predecessor or precondition. They've been established in the HR system and in your project and portfolio management system. And projects are established in the PPM system. So these are things that we assume are already done before going into the heart of our process. And we've created a couple of things, a couple of entities, data points, whatever you want to call them. We have a worker and we have a project. Those things exist in the system. Then we get into the phase of assignment initiation. We've got a personnel assignment decision. That leads to a couple of things. The resource manager is going to assign the resources to the project, and the project manager will create the project tasks. When that gets done, you have this new thing that exists in the system. It's a resource project assignment. So that's the intersection that says this resource is now working on this project. And then the project manager assigns project tasks to the resource. And then you move into an ongoing assignment management phase where you will review and adjust those allocations for the life of the project, for the life of the employee. Pretty straightforward stuff. So here's that process map again, a little bit blown up. But now I want to point out a couple of things. Let's say that as a BA, your job is to go in and learn how this is done, to interview different people, to elicit process state and what systems they work in and what they do, and then model it out. As you model it out, you'll create these things. You'll realize in talking to person X that, oh, wait, the project manager has something to do with this process. So you'll wind up adding their lane. That tells you something. And then you'll say, oh, wait, not only do they assign, I've learned as a business analyst, I've learned that not only do they assign a resource, a person to a project, they then have specific tasks that are assigned to that person in that project. That's a new conceptual entity and system entity that I have to put in here. So here's another process map. This one is a little bit more in depth. What I wanted to point out is that this is a related process. Because here we're talking about, this is how we assign people to projects. Here we're talking about, this is how we log project change requests. Now the assumption here is that we're going to be using Jira. So our roles on the left are the person who's requesting the change, a change control committee, your project manager, your PPM system, and your Jira ticket system. So first thing that happens is this person, the change requester, submits a CR in Jira. So that means you've got this new artifact in Jira, a change request ticket. And then you have a process that kicks off weekly, as this clock here, where the change control committee goes through deciding whether or not to do the change, updating the request ticket, entering changes in the PPM system, and so forth. I'm not going to run through all the details here. The point that I want to make is that in comparison to the previous process model, we've realized we've got a new system here. We have a new player. We've got Jira. We have new things, entities, conceptual data objects, physical data objects in the Jira system, which is the change request ticket. And we have new things that are being done in the system by the project manager. So we've revealed a little bit more about our enterprise here. Does this all make sense so far? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Good, thank you. All right, so let's talk about how you would derive architecture from this kind of process models. So if you look back at our process models, we identified 3 actors, business actors, teams or roles: a labor resource, a resource manager, and a project manager. Recall from the one where we set up a labor resource and assign them to a project, it was just a generic labor resource. That was assigned to anybody. That could be anybody. But then you have a resource manager who's doing specific stuff, and you have a project manager who's doing specific stuff. You have some conceptual business objects, things that people talk about and think about. How is the project going? How far has this person gotten on the task? Is the task list complete? If people have conversations about it in that way, it is a conceptual idea, a business object, which we'll see is also reflected in your systems as a logical data object. We'll talk about that in a moment. And then you have some processes. We see, okay, we have the resource management and allocation adjustment. That was our top level first process that we looked at. But then we have some sub things that they do. There's a process to create the project in the PPM system. There's a process to assign the resources to projects, assign tasks to projects, and review and adjust allocations. You can really intuit all of this stuff just by going through the process model and kind of, looking at it 90 degrees and saying, okay, what are the things that I've written down here? Same thing over here for the technology layer. You've got 2 systems. You've got your HR system and your PPM system. I didn't put Jira in here just for purposes of simplification. And then in the HR system, you have a resource, a person, a role, whatever you want to call it. You have the same idea, a person, a resource, in your PPM system. And then in the PPM system, you have a project, and in the PPM system, you have a task. Those are logical data objects, all of these things, and they're all part of your technology layer. So recall that I talked about the color coding. Typically when you're using Archimate, when you pull these objects out, first put them on a screen or whatever, these are the colors because that's the standard color framework. So this is stage 1 of deriving your business architecture from your process models. Does this make sense? Does anybody have any questions?
No, I think you're doing a great job. It totally makes sense.
Okay, good.
I'd like to ask, is there a one-to-one relationship between the project and the task and the business objects, and the project and the task and the logical data objects?
So that is a data modeling concept.
Mm-hmm.
That is not really used in a business architecture sense.
Okay.
But there is a composition relationship, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. So let's go to stage 2. Stage 2 is, let's look at our relationships between types. So we talked about our different kinds of people, our different roles. And if we talk it through or think it through, we realize that everybody's a labor resource. That's kind of our highest level of person, employee, resource, personnel, whatever you want to call it. But some people have specialized roles. So a project manager is a specialization of a labor resource. That's a specific relationship that is modeled with this kind of hollow-headed arrow. Same thing for a resource manager. So a resource manager is a specialized kind of labor resource. The neat thing about this is that if you create a process or a business rule or something like that, that says a labor resource does this, or X rule applies to a labor resource, because these are specializations, that means those same rules, those same constraints apply to every specialized kind of labor resource. So any rule or any constraint that you apply to a labor resource would automatically apply to a resource manager, would automatically apply to a project manager. But if you make a specific rule that only applies to project managers, that's not going to affect your general labor resource, because a project manager is a specialized labor resource. That's the nature of that relationship. Okay, then let's talk about the composition relationship. A composition relationship is when one thing is made up of smaller things, And that one thing has to be made up of those smaller things. So the resource management and allocation adjustment process has to consist of creating a project in the PPM system, assigning resources to projects, assigning tasks to projects, and review and adjust allocations. If you don't do those things, this parent process is not complete. So that is actually reflected in your process models with something like this. You'll see that this is a sub-process. That's what that little plus means there. The process of hiring and establishing them in the HR system and the process of establishing them in the PPM system is a sub-process, or actually a predecessor, of this whole resource adjustment and allocation process. Same thing here. If we were going to model this whole process out, we would have to include the subs of submitting a CR in JIRA and entering a change in the PPM system. Those have that little plus on them, so that's the symbol of a sub-process. Now, when you're modeling processes, you always have to strike a balance between completeness and velocity. For the problem I'm trying to solve, for the audience I'm speaking to, it may not be important to model out this submit CR in JIRA process. So I'm not going to do it because it doesn't have any value. Everybody knows how to do it. It's working fine. But if this enter change in the PPM system process is a problem, people don't know how to do it, people can't agree on how to do it, nobody's decided how to do it, or we need to train a bunch of people on how to do it, then there's value in modeling that one out. So that's a constant balancing act that you have to do because, again, you only have so much time and you always want to keep your eye on solving the business problem that you've been asked to solve. Okay, so that talks a little bit about relationships within types. Those, however, are not the only kind of relationships that are important. We can also have relationships between types. Now, the relationships between types, I normally start within one layer. So we're going to talk about the business layer first. Processes don't do anything and have no value if somebody doesn't use them. So there is a used by relationship between an actor and a process. So the resource management and allocation adjustment is actually used by two different actors here. It's used by the project manager and it's used by the resource manager. And you'll see that the symbol here is a little bit different. It's that open arrow. Not a triangle, but an open arrow. I'll also tell you that if you try to, in any Archimate tool that was worthwhile, if you try to make the process the other way to reverse the relationship, it would disallow it. Because it makes sense for a process to be used by a project manager. It does not make sense for a project manager to be used by a process. That's a nonsensical relationship. But I will say that most of these relationships have a converse. So you could instead model that a project manager uses the process. And that would actually look the same. It's just the label would be different. Project manager uses the process. Okay, questions so far? Okay, and you can tell this is actually probably the easiest thing to derive, because if a process or a step is in the lane for your particular worker, you know that they're involved in that process.
Keith, can you talk a minute about when you would choose to use this versus a swim lane diagram?
Yeah, so a swim lane diagram is designed to drive common understanding and explain a sequential process. You'll notice that there's no sequence here. This is not about sequence. This is about relationships. So let's say that you've gotten this far in your model and somebody in your organization, you get a mandate that says, we need to change our resource management and allocation process. Who is it going to affect? Now you know, because the project manager and the resource manager are the resources, are the actors, the business actors who make use of that process. So they're really designed to solve different problems.
Gotcha.
Okay, so let's talk about relationships between types in the technology layer. So you'll see we have this concept here of a project and here of a task. Those get realized, or you also have those, take that back for a minute. You also have those in your systems, because people will talk about a project, as I said, people will talk about a task, but then they will go to their portfolio management system, they'll go to their Clarity, they'll go to their, whatever their project management system is, and they will pull up the version of the project that's in that system. That's what this is. This is a logical data object. Same thing with a resource, which is in this case reflected in two systems. It's in the HR system and it's in the PPM system. So you see you have resource here and resource here. The relationship there is it's called an accesses relationship. The system accesses the physical data object. The next stage is relationships between types. Now remember, I talked about project in the business layer as a concept. That is realized by the project in your portfolio system. The task, the idea of a task, the concept of a task is realized in your portfolio system as a task. Now I could also have the idea of resource here, and that could be realized here in your HR system, and that could be realized here in your PPM system. I just didn't put those relationships in to keep the model clear. But you also have relationships between the different business actors and the systems they use. You know from your models that the project manager uses the PPM system, and that the resource manager uses the PPM system, and that the resource manager uses the HR system. So this helps you answer those same kind of questions, but in a different way. Hey, we need to change our PPM system, and we need to change the definition of a resource in our PPM system. Who do we need to talk to? Who uses that system? Well, now we know. It's our project managers and our resource managers. So this is a very simplistic model, but I think this gives you the idea of how you can derive some business architecture facts from your process modeling and start to use those to answer various questions. Okay, so actually, before I move on, does anybody have any questions?
I'd like to interrupt for just one moment. Folks, if y'all can help me in taking attendance by putting in chat your first and last name, where you're listening from, and how you found out about the study group, it would help me a great deal. I don't want to not give you credit. This 1 hour goes toward your education credit for your CBAP certification or your CCBA or whichever certification you're going after. I want to be sure everyone gets credit, but I want to give you time to get that done. So please enter that into the chat for me, and I would really appreciate it. I'll turn it back over to you, Keith.
Okay. All right, and I'll open the floor for questions. Does anybody have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Does this make sense, or do I sound crazy?
Keith, that's Ilya. Hey, so I have a question, maybe that we will come to that. The major deliverable of the business architect, is it the left side, what's in orange, or is it both? Well, I mean, processes and also technology.
That is a great question, Ilya. I'm really glad you asked that, because I have made the mistake early in my career in thinking that the models are the deliverables. And while the models are a deliverable, the models are not the point in themselves. So it's not the left side or the right side or any particular layer. It's the ability to provide insight to the people who have to make strategic decisions.
Change management.
So,
okay, but if talking exact documentation, will it be some document which will have those insights, obviously, right? Which will help to.
And there's a lot of ways to get to that. I'll give you an example. I use an application which is called Blue Dolphin. It provides the ability to have what's called a view like this, but then automatically color code it based on the metadata of these various objects. So let's imagine you only had the right-hand side, only the blue stuff. There's a control within the system that would say, okay, I want you to show me or highlight only the systems that are used by project managers. So the HR system would fade and the PPM system would light up. Now with the various kind of metadata that you can attach to these, because you can customize the metadata. You can have what business unit it's in. You can have where it is in its life cycle. You can have whether it's custom built or vendor, any of that kind of stuff. And then you can either do kind of a visual highlighting report on that, or you can actually create a report like, like an Excel or a database report that says, here's all of the users of the HR system. Here's all of the strategic initiatives that are going to affect the HR system. Then flip that on that side and say, here's all the processes that the HR system supports. So when you're providing that kind of stuff, you're answering the questions that the business needs. So it's not one fixed set of deliverable. And in the business analyst world, usually your deliverables are a fixed set of models and a fixed set of requirements. One of the challenges that I face with business architecture is, what can I deliver that will answer the question that the business needs answered? Sometimes it's a visual, sometimes it's a simple report, sometimes it's a collection of models.
Okay, I see.
Okay. Further questions? Thank you, Elliot, for your question. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay, that sounds like a no for the moment, so I'll go ahead and move on. So from this basic analysis, here's an example of some of the questions you can answer. We've decided to outsource our resource management. What applications do the new contractors need to access? Well, if you look at the role of resource manager, and especially, and this is obviously just a very, very paper thin sample, but if you had done some more analysis and had a little bit richer architectural repository, you would look at that resource management role and say, okay, here's the systems that they talk to. Here's another one. We need to make a change to our resource allocation process for a legal reason. Who do we need to involve and what data objects within the PPM system will we need to change? That's a tough question to answer if you don't have an architectural analysis or an architectural repository to answer it. And here's another one. We're changing our payroll processor and need to add project and task info to payroll records. What systems do we need to work with? Now, payroll wasn't in scope of this, but you can imagine that all of the time entry, all of the tasks that are in that PPM system, those are going to feed into payroll. So, well, a lot of times what happens is you wind up, your organization in some way winds up doing some of this kind of analysis, typically from a more technical standpoint, which is why you get those misses that I talked about in the beginning. Users who are missed, data points that were missed, systems that were missed, a lack of training, a lack of the unintended consequences of a change, because you don't really understand your business from a holistic architectural standpoint. And that's the value of a practice of business architecture. So how do you make the leap? Well, don't think about solving the problem, but think about the things and the relationship between the things. Whether or not you intend to pursue a business architecture position, career, if you start thinking about the things in your business, the things in your domain, the things in your enterprise, the things in your business unit, and the relationships between those things, practicing that kind of thinking will make you a much better business analyst, because you'll develop the ability to ask the questions about unintended consequences or the impacts of proposed change. And I think we all know that it is much, much better to ask that question and get that change rolled into your program than it is to get further down the road and realize, oh my gosh, we didn't talk to the Seattle office. Or this has a tax implication and nobody thought about it because nobody bothered to talk to finance because we didn't know that they use that system, or we didn't know that they were a downstream consumer of that particular piece of information. And I think those of us who have been in the software industry for a while can always come up with those kind of stories of what I'll classify under unintended consequences. Nobody wants those. They're the most expensive thing there is.
Sure. And they end up making you feel so foolish after you go, oh, I should have thought.
Yeah.
That's the way you learn.
Yep. So how would you build a business architecture practice if you were interested in that? Well, this is the way that I've done it, and so I can really only speak to that. TOGAF gives you a framework to start thinking about and delivering business architecture. You'll notice that it's got a pretty good alignment here with Archimate. You've got the business layer, which is your business architecture, the application layer, which is your information systems, and the technology layer, which is your actual technology, your routers, your hubs, your operating systems, your Amazon Web Services, your cloud installations, all that kind of stuff. So you can start thinking about it this way. Another exercise you might want to run yourself through is pull out the Zachman framework and see how many of those boxes you can fill in. And if you're working on it, especially if you're at the early scoping stages of a project and you can't fill in a phase or a level or a square that you believe will be impacted, think about that and start talking about that and start wondering what questions about the scope and impacts of your project. Because what I'll call the architectural mindset can definitely benefit the practicing business analyst on a day-to-day basis. Okay, that's what I have for today. Thank you all very much for allowing me to come and talk to you, and let's do some Q&A if anybody has any questions or input.
I just want to say that I've thought about all those things, and they're kind of all in my framework and the way I think about things, but I always love hearing someone say it a different way. And you've given me a lot of raw material to try to communicate in different ways. And I would actually love to talk to you at some point when I've done some of that.
Okay. So I will say to anybody, hit me up on LinkedIn. The reason I do what I do is that my passion is about helping people do what they need to do better, which is really the role that business analysts and business architects are in. It's not just avoiding error, it's about getting the maximum value out of the people and assets of an organization. And that applies to the people that I network with. So I really like to train and teach, talk about this stuff. So please feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn and reach out.
Very good. Who else has a question or comment? Keith, you did a fantastic job. They have no questions. You explained it. I would like to emphasize the concept of the Zachman framework whenever you go into a new company and a new job, to try to fill it out, because it's going to show you where your gaps are. And so that will help you go in and fill in those gaps. It's very comprehensive. In fact, if you get into it deeply, you're going to find out that it's so comprehensive. You can't do the entire company, but you can do your process with the company information.
Yep, for a simple matrix, it is surprisingly powerful.
It is very powerful.
I have a question, if you let me. So, Keith, usually the path, the career path for the business architect is that person who worked a lot in the company as a business analyst or some other role and knows the business very good, or that not necessarily, maybe somebody who is looking from outside, like kind of a helicopter view, will be better in that role than the one who is already like knows the business very, very good?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever necessarily thought about it. I will say that if you come out of a particular business unit or a particular role, whether you're a technologist or a manager or a business analyst, you are going to have to change your thinking about your scope and your thinking about the processes that you're really working with. The challenge for a seasoned business architect who comes into a new organization is the same as anybody who comes into a new organization. You're gonna have a lot to learn. And a key skill for any business analyst is active listening, reflecting, clarification, facilitation, communication. as fundamental as that is for a business analyst, it's at least as fundamental for a business architect. So over the years when I've had job interviews and they say, how would you start? I always say my job for the first 3 months is to just listen. And then it's to ask the questions and then use my skills and knowledge, and my background to dig into the questions behind the questions. But so I can't say that there's been any one path. In my experience, every business architect that I've met has come in one way or another differently. And they're both going to have their own unique challenges. But if you can't, a business architect fundamentally works in a different domain than a business analyst. So as part of the job, you're just going to have to change your scope, the way you think about things. And you should expect it to take a little time.
Very good. Okay, we have time for one last question. Anybody? Okay, Keith, thank you so much for being here. You've given us new information that we didn't have before.
My pleasure. Thank you, everyone. And I appreciate the invitation.
It's been fantastic. If you want a letter of recommendation, just let us know and we'll send an official IIBA letter of recommendation your way.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording. We will meet here next week. Next week, we're going to have Tammy Bearden, who is a knowledge management specialist. It is a legit job, guys. People that can handle SharePoint and Confluence and do data mining in ways that you haven't ever even thought of. She's able to find information. She gave me a scenario the other day. She had to find out how many people lived within 50 miles of a water source in the state of Arizona that had an income level of between X and Y and had an education level between X and Y. I don't even know where I would start to go find that information, but that's part of her job. Yeah. So she'll be here next week to talk to us about her job and how she got into it and what she does, what tools she uses. And if she were to work with business analysts, the best way she would be able to work with us, give us information and what she needs from us. Okay, I will see you here next week. Y'all have a wonderful week.
So Dia, will that presentation be shared or that's not shareable?
Which presentation?
I mean, the one Keith just did. Or
Oh,
Keith.
Will
A
you
PowerPoint.
PowerPoint?
Yeah.
I'll send it to you, Thea.
Okay, send it to me. If you want it, contact me on LinkedIn and I'll share it out that way. And
Okay.
if you're in attendance, please put your information in the chat. I want to know your first and last name, where you're listening from, and how you found out about our classes. That would help us a great deal. Y'all have a great week. Talk to you later.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.